Welcome to Lights Out. I'm John Weiss.
And I'm Andy Henderson.
And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about something that we've kind of hinted and touched on in previous sessions, but it's how to start and scale effectively with a new project using new types of technologies. And so to kick it off, Andy, I want to start with you. What are some common pitfalls or challenges that you've seen companies face when they're adopting new technologies?
I think it's, probably the biggest one is trying to do too much right out of the gate. You always want to have a good justification, a good value story for what you're doing. And so people will tend to think, well, if I if I if I'm not doing a big enough project, then I just won't have the payback that I really need in order to justify doing it in the first place. And so things tend to scale and get out of hand really quickly, and it's almost it almost defeats itself a little bit, because in order to do a large project, you have to have a really solid justification, and then you have to go build that really solid justification. So you have to do a lot of analysis of what the benefits could be if you were to go do the work, and it becomes this cycle that means that you don't get started and you don't start answering questions and proving hypotheses until much later. How about you? What do you see as pitfalls?
Doing too much too fast. I agree with that. I think, to your point, I think it's a lot of pressure that people come under. If you put yourself into the shoes of the buyer, somebody who's going to acquire some new technology, somebody that has to make an investment on behalf of the business, there's tremendous pressure on those folks to show a return on the investment virtually instantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Executives are pushing them really hard. Okay, if I'm going to give you money to go buy some technology or to get some headcount to build something, you need to prove to me very quickly that this is going to work and that we're going to get some kind of quantifiable business impact.
Yeah.
And I think that's a driver for starting too big. Absolutely.
And the other thing that would happen to me was I would go in with a pitch about, this is the technology I want to do, this is where I want to use, this is where and how I want to apply it, and this is the expected value I'm going to get from it. And many cases the question is, well, that's great, but is this the best place to do it? Could we get more value doing it somewhere else? And that's a fair question, but it sort of slows down the process again, right? It puts up another roadblock. Now you have to go investigate. And what if you do find another place where there's potentially more value? Can you say for sure that the people who control that area, who are the operators in that area, that they are going to be as willing to adopt the technology as maybe this other group that you'd already been down the path with? So in some cases, right, if there's we shouldn't always just take it blindly, but in some cases, like if there's a good ROI on something that's right in front of you, it's kind of like the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush type of thing. Take it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Take it and start to build momentum behind your initiative. I spoke to a guy from Halliburton, and just to echo the point around people spending a lot of time planning and thinking about how they want to do things before they actually do it, especially big organizations. But anyway, I was talking to this guy from Halliburton that heads up one of their analytic groups, and we were having this dialogue about some of the new technology they're testing, and they're doing some POCs and pilots in the field and things like that. And at some point in the conversation, he casually dropped that this is year number 6 of testing technology, right? So 6 years they're testing stuff. They don't want to roll anything out in production yet, but they're just kind of kicking tires for 6 years. I've worked on some long projects, not 6 years.
Well, we somewhat joke about, there's a common theme where large organizations will go talk to large consulting companies, and those large consulting companies will want to pick apart every little business practice, and they'll say, here's how you can transform this one and this one and this one, and by the end of it, at the end of 2 years, 3 years, you'll have fully transformed everything. And again, that's great. Think big, but if there's not the the very tactical get started to prove out some, because what will happen, right? What will inevitably happen is that you'll get into it 1 or 2 months in and you'll hit a snag or a roadblock, or maybe you say, hey, I've tested something here and it's just opened up a whole new world of possibilities that wasn't on the original plan. And really what makes sense for me to do now is pivot in that direction. But you've taken all of that work that you put in those 6 months prepping and getting that plan in place, and you've just invalidated it.
Yeah, the plan is critical. Absolutely. Some kind of a plan, right? It doesn't have to be $1 million roadmap put together by Accenture or Deloitte or any of these big consulting companies, but it has to be something that's strategic and well thought out, whether it's done internally or externally. And one of the things that I see a lot of companies do is they get really excited to embrace new technology. Sometimes they invest in it just for the sake of investing in it because they want to use it. And then they're in a position where they didn't think about the larger picture and how it fits into the larger enterprise ecosystem. And so they start, which is a good place to start. They often start with some kind of connectivity. Let's get some information from somewhere. Let's get an asset connected. But the problem is they don't plan on how they want to take that data and contextualize it with the rest of the enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about let's just pick on a CNC machine, for example, right? If you're a machine shop or you have a machine shop portion of your floor somewhere in your process, and you are machining some metals, and okay, it's one thing to understand that you have some kind of high vibration on your CNC machine, right? It's another thing to know that you have a high vibration because of the type of job you're running, and because of the type of metal you're milling. And you put that against your PO that's currently being executed on the floor, so you know that that's supposed to be happening, right? All of that context is what makes the data really valuable. But I don't see a lot of people planning for that integration part back into the rest of the business. I think that's one common pitfall. And I know I'm kind of picking on integration specifically, but I think it's just a good example of why it's so important to plan for the bigger picture before you jump in with both feet.
So how to plan, right? Because one might say, okay, in order to do that, I have to go find my expert on my production scheduling system, and I have to bring them into the project along with my really talented manufacturing engineer who knows the ins and outs of that specific process. And somebody has to sit in the middle to sort of mediate all these discussions because those people aren't going to be talking the same language. And so I have to pull this team together, and and have them on the same page and working in lockstep together. But then, like, who's going to be doing their normal day-to-day type of activities while they're in this new team that I've assembled and working? Like how do you think through that particular part of the problem, so that people don't get mired down and trying to, you know what I mean? Am I making sense?
I do know what you mean. To me, I think it starts a little bit simpler. So I think it starts by bringing together the IT and the OT folks, right? Traditionally, a lot of what we're talking about, this is OT stuff. But when you look at how it relates back to the rest of the business and how you can merge this new OT data and contextualize it with the rest of the enterprise data, a lot of times, almost always, that's going to be an IT initiative, right? And the way that you do that, you have to bring IT and OT to the table. So you have to bring the people that know the ERP systems, that know how SAP is configured, that know how to interact with those things. You have to bring them to the table and say, hey guys, we're working on this new project, and bring them in early, by the way. Don't build the platform or build the initiative and then say, hey, IT guys, we need all that data and we need it now. because that's typically what happens. And that's what causes a lot of headbutting and a lot of friction inside of companies. Um, so get IT's buy-in early and tell them, hey, we have a plan. This is our strategic roadmap. Part of this roadmap is going to require pushing and pulling data from some of your systems. Can you help us make this happen? Or what do we have to do to make this happen, right?
One of the things that I always like to do was to let say those folks know, right? Because I come from the operational side of things. I'd rather be able to, because I might go and say, here's the idea. I'm going to go test it to make sure that I'm right, that it's going to be valuable enough to bother doing the next step with. I'm going to go test it, but here's the general framework of what I'm trying to accomplish. And if I am successful, then we're going to need to do some integration. But before we start spending dollars and trying to architect this system to do all that integration, let me go first, just make sure that I'm right, that there will actually be value from doing this thing in the first place.
Yeah. I think it's great to do it that way because you're telling people, you're telling IT folks or people that may otherwise not be involved in your project out of the gate, hey, just want to let you guys know, I've got this new thing going on. I want it on your radar because I might need your help if it proves to be successful. I think that's something that a lot of people don't do. And then they show up at the 11th hour with a list of demands from supporting teams, which then, of course, delays the entire project because nobody is going to just jump to help you when they don't know what it is that you're talking about and they don't have time to, especially in the IT world, they need to take time and make sure what you're doing is not going to compromise some kind of mission critical IT infrastructure. So it's really important to get them involved early. I love that idea.
On the whole get connected piece of it, right? There's a what I know and have seen is that lots of times there's already data being stored somewhere, whether there is an OT team that's just been gathering data and sticking it in a historian or whatever, right? That there's oftentimes data somewhere. So we're not talking about getting connected from the standpoint of going and saying we're going to start fresh, all anew here at this work center and start putting sensors on and collecting data. We're talking about just identifying a place where you think value may reside, a problem that you think you can address, and data that supports it one way or the other, and then take that historical data or that data that you already have, historical swath of it is good, prove out, do your analysis on it, prove out the thing that you think is there. So demonstrate that you can answer the question or identify the problem so that you can address it and add value. And once you've done that, then again, that's a good jumping off point to say, let's make a connection to that system, whatever that system is.
From my perspective, when I think about the maturity curve of these projects, how they're typically implemented, just because we talk about connectivity as number one, it doesn't mean that it's not, the box isn't already checked, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people are connected. A lot of people today have data about their processes. Yeah. It might not be all of the data we need, and it might not be all of the data that's going to be sufficient for this project, but there's a good chance they've got a good bit of information on what's needed. So I think get connected means a lot of different things. It means if you're total brownfield and you're not connected at all, well, you got to start getting connected and retrofitting stuff, right? If you're greenfield and you have connectivity, then you probably can check that box and move on to the next step, which is starting to look at the data and analyze what you've begun pulling off of those assets.
And it's probably going to be a loop too, right? You're gonna take that data, you're gonna analyze it, you're gonna find what I keep calling the value, and then that's going to say, okay, we should make that live connection, that real-time connection to that system that helped us do that. But then you're going to say, well, we've got one that's almost identical over here, but it's not connected. There's no data coming from it. But you use what you've just learned there to go to first of all justify the cost of putting sensors on or getting at the data from that other one that's not connected. And it's this loop of what you're saying, that getting connected, analyzing.
Absolutely.
I'm screwing up your 4 points.
That's okay. There's no, it's more of an art form in many ways than a science, I think. But I think fundamentally, when you look at adopting these kinds of technologies, and by these kinds of technologies, I'm talking about your AI, your artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR type applications, predictive analytics, all of this new analytic driven stuff, right? That's what I mean when I say these technologies. But
Mm-hmm.
I think fundamentally we're all after the same thing. It's how do I get this information from these assets, whether it's information that I don't know yet, or it's information that I'm aware that it exists, but I need to capture it. Okay. How do I get it from point A all the way to, let's say, point X, Y, or Z over here, which is autonomously doing things, right? That's the holy grail of all of this, right? It starts with the asset. It ends with some kind of automation of a process, whether it's autonomously fulfilling a part, order, or replacement, autonomously kicking off a services ticket, autonomously shutting down an asset before there's a catastrophic failure that damages equipment, right? It can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the holy grail, right? And so when you look at the connectivity part, to your point, I do think that that's an iterative process, because even especially on sophisticated assets that are very large, many parts, many moving parts, you may go back several times after you collect data and put new sensors, new types
Mm-hmm.
of measurement instruments, because now you've learned so much from your data, you want to know even more, and it might not be equipped to tell you more just yet.
Yep, 100% agree with that. I come from the world of asset test, or like testing and development of this equipment, diesel engines in particular. And one of the things there is that each sensor costs. There's a cost to it, and so if you can, rather than, because the engineer brain may say, if I only knew temperature and pressure and for every single cylinder exhaust, on every port along the exhaust header, and I also had vibration for the engine, and da 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 da, on and on and on, then I could build this perfect model of how that engine operates. But each one of those sensors has a cost associated with it, and pennies add up when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of these things. And so there's a big push, or there was and continues to be a big push to say, well, can I extract more information out of a single sensor? Can I use one thing in order to tell me about 5 aspects of how that asset operates? And can I, what I don't have sensors to tell me, can I use things like physics-based models to augment, so that I know things like, in my engine example, I know RPM and torque, and I know fuel delivery, so I can estimate other parameters about how that engine's operating. And then maybe I have a sensor that's monitoring exhaust temperature, but my model says exhaust temperature should be 100 degrees cooler than what the sensor says. Then that could be an indication that something has gone out of control with that asset, that thing that I'm monitoring. Now I'm off on a rant somewhere, but
I think it's a good point, and there's a lot to unpack there. So let me unpack some of it. I think first and foremost, you mentioned something that's really interesting, and it's around the cost justification of instrumenting an asset, right? So perhaps in my maturity curve, when I talk about connectivity as number 1 and then automation as number 5 or so, maybe connectivity is really number 2, in business, and a business case or use case is actually number 1. Because that is when we look at pitfalls and things that people stumble upon, or struggle with in these implementations. I mentioned earlier that I've seen a lot of organizations adopt technology just for the sake of adopting it because it's cool. But without that business case, you'll run right into the wall that you just mentioned, where you've run out of funding and you're not going to get executive sponsorship to get more money to buy the sensors you need because you never had a business justification to begin with that warrants the investment in this type of technology. That's a really good point. The the other piece that you mentioned is how sensor technology is kind of changing and people want to get more multivariant sort of measurements from a single sensor to mitigate cost. Um, that's a great point too. Lots of really good companies out there that are making pretty unique sensors, things like an iPhone's a good example, a cell phone, because you've got the accelerometer, the gyroscope. It knows if there's light being emitted close or far from it. That's how it goes off when you put it to your head, right? It's got that photocell on it. And there's all of these different things. So I like to use that as a simple example. But I remember a couple of years ago, I had a discussion with a guy at a company called Sea Level, actually right here in Greenville. And they're manufacturers of custom sensors. So you go to them and you say, hey guys, I got a monitor XYZ, and they'll say, all right, we're on it. And they'll build a sensor that does that. And one thing that I remember them showing me, it was a single sensor that they had built to monitor refrigeration trucks, so cold storage. And what they were doing was they had equipped this sensor with some kind of strip of sensor nodes that basically went down the entire body of the trailer. And so what they were able to do is not only tell you if there was some kind of increase in temperature that could potentially spoil products, they could tell you which portion of the truck had a temperature spike so that you didn't have to now waste an entire truckload of goods if you knew that only a portion of the truck actually had the heat rise to a dangerous level. And those are the kinds of things that now it's one sensor opposed to having to put maybe 4 or 5 throughout the body of an 18-wheeler. And these things can also come equipped with a gyroscope. So you can also not only monitor the temperature throughout the whole trailer, but did the thing get bumped in transit to an aggressive level to where the goods may have been damaged? Were they traveling too fast to where things could have shifted? All of this data from one piece of equipment.
Mm-hmm. That's a good example. What you said in the beginning about the business case, one of the things I used to like that I would do, and I haven't done so much of lately, but I can explain why, is I always like to see going into a new into a new operation, the value stream map, the process flow, right? And just look at how it all operates or flows, and then talk to people about where their bottlenecks are, where the constraints are, because those are ultimately going to be the things that you're most concerned about, right? But knowing that once you improve, say, throughput or availability of the bottleneck, it's probably going to move somewhere else, or not probably, it could, and it may. And so looking at those process flows or the value stream maps, it helps identify where those things are, and that those are generally good candidates for going and digging further. But today, we tend to rely a lot more on the folks who are on the floor, who who work with the process every single day to know where the real problems are, because truthfully, they're the ones. They feel the pain. They know what the issues are, and they probably even have an idea of how to fix it. But they just need a little extra push, a little extra information that they didn't have before in order to justify going further. So helping them, it does the whole thing of just proving the value and establishing a precedence that you can then take and do again. And through that process, right, if you just kind of trust those people, through that process, you can then use the data that you've collected, the information that you've gathered by doing that to refine where the value proposition, where it may be. But you're right. Yeah, I think your point was, if you aren't keeping value top of mind, you will get to a point where you may have run out of you'll run out of funding, or you don't have the justification behind you in order to keep doing the next thing. You'll hit a wall, so to speak.
If you can't prove that your initiative is going to save money or increase something that otherwise equates to money, like an increase in efficiencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're probably dead in the water before you even begin your project. That's why it's
Mm-hmm.
critical to start with the business justification. Yeah, it's a great point. One
Yes.
one thing that interests me too, it's the claim that we've done it, right? You know, when I talk to people about IoT, specifically IoT is the buzzword now that I think has a lot of negative connotation in
Mm-hmm.
some respects, because um, I think a lot of people say, "Oh, IoT, we've done that. No value there. It doesn't work," or "We got nothing from it," right? And when I think about, again, the maturity of these projects, get connected, analyze the data that's coming off of your connected assets, integrate it back into the enterprise to contextualize it and enrich it with other data from the business, and then use that to automate processes in your enterprise, in your production, in your supply chain, whatever it may be, in your field services processes, right? When you look at those 4 or 5 steps, I think a lot of people start at number one, which is a good place to start. I wouldn't recommend you start at number 5, right? Start at number 1, get connected. I think that's right about where most folks end the journey. They connect a
Mm-hmm.
couple machines, they collect some data, they build a pretty dashboard in one of the million dashboarding tools that exists on the market, and they call that IoT. And they say, all right, we're done. We did IoT. And as you know, there's virtually no value in doing that. It's just a pretty way to look at data that we already knew in many respects, right? The
Yeah.
value comes later in the curve. But I'd love to get your take on that. Or do you feel the same way? Do you see a lot of the same stuff?
Yeah, I'm always skeptical. I hear that a lot too. We've tried it, and there's nothing there. Like, it doesn't matter what IoT X, whatever, put X in, and people will say we've tried it and there's no value. I'm always skeptical of that one, because there's a lot, as you're saying, right? There's lots of reasons why that could have happened. The one that I used to see a lot was that there would be somebody pushing an initiative forward. They would get it past that first gate. They'd get connected, right? They'd start getting data flowing, and they'd start looking at data, and then they'd get promoted. They'd move on somewhere else. And then there was nobody behind them that had the same passion to keep moving the ball forward. And it drops. And then people that were watching around, they start to think, hey, it was because there's no value there in the first place. That's why the first person let it drop, and that's why nobody's there to pick it up the second time. Some of that may be true, right? Or most likely what's happened is that the value just wasn't communicated well, back to the whole discussion we were having a moment ago. Somebody intuitively knew that there was value in doing it, but they didn't communicate it to the next person, and it was never carried forward. So, but absolutely, I agree with you. That is oftentimes a roadblock, and I think people just have to be shown that not know. I don't know what happened the last time, because I wasn't here when it happened, but I can promise you that the technology, don't what is it saying? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The technology is solid, and it can definitely save money, or increase throughput, or improve quality, whatever the issue is at hand.
And it's come a long way too. It's not analytics today, IoT platforms today, they're not what they were even 18 months ago, right? If you look at all of the new features and functions that people have been releasing over the last year, 18 months, the I would say the acceleration of this market, the technical acceleration it's real aggressive over the last year and a half. Some companies have come out with some really incredible things. And maybe that's a whole nother segment we can do, because I think I'm quickly running out of time here. But the point I'm trying to make is that this universe of emerging technologies has evolved greatly in a very short period of time. And so some of the naysayers, I think some of those folks are people that have experimented with this 2, 3, 4 years ago, maybe even longer. And now they have a bad taste in their mouth of this buzzword IoT. That's why I don't like to say IoT anymore. I just call it emerging technologies, because that's really what it is. It's evolutionary, it's changing, and it's not what it was. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and I don't know how relevant this is, but even in the artificial intelligence field, there was a drought, like a long period of time where people weren't really doing much in the field, just because things like computational resources weren't available to do it. And if you were working in the AI field, it was almost comical. It was almost funny to the other researchers, because the technology just wasn't there. There was a belief that you weren't going to get results out of that research. But now the pendulum has swung, right? We do have lots of data and massive amounts of computational power, and now it makes these different techniques, neural networks, for example, more feasible to use and apply.
Absolutely. It wasn't that long ago that nobody had any idea what a quantum computer was. Now they exist, and now a couple people have them, right? GPT-2 goes to GPT-3. When we look at artificial intelligence and compute power and just the intelligence of models, from version 2 to version 3, it's over 100 times more powerful, is my understanding. GPT-3, the way they train that model, just to give you an idea of the scale of this thing, and I'll fact check myself on the video here and put some fine print, but if memory serves correct, the entire English version of Wikipedia, the website Wikipedia, the entire US version makes up 0.8% of the training used in that model. I can't even fathom that. I'm sorry. That's a whole lot of data, right?
Absolutely. That's remarkable.
Crazy stuff. So Andy, I think we're just about out of time here, but as we wrap, what's your advice for folks as they embrace new technologies? We talked a lot about pitfalls. We talked a lot about planning, the importance of having a strategic plan, thinking about the big picture. Any final words on what people can do to make sure they're set up for success?
I don't know. I mean, other than trying to summarize everything we talked about, just keep the value in mind. Think about the long-term bigger picture, what it can do for your organization. But don't try to tackle that all at one time. Don't try to eat the elephant. Start with one little bite. Start with a bite. Prove that you can do what you think you can do, or what you think it will do on a subscale. And then once you've done that, run like hell. Expand as much as possible, as fast as possible, so that you can reach that big goal that you've got in mind.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, to all the listeners and viewers, thanks so much for tuning into this session. Like and subscribe. We would love to hear some comments from you. What have you experienced? Have you fell into some of these pitfalls? Do you know some tricks that we didn't mention? We'd love to hear from you. So leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.